Joining us now to talk about it all is the Business Minister, Greg Hands MP. Good morning to you. It's a big ask, isn't it, for Jeremy Hunt to turn things around? If you take a look at the latest polling, the worst polling yet for the Conservatives. I mean, they're used to seeing these kinds of figures, but 26, 27 percentage points behind in the polls. Ouch. He's got to do something tomorrow.
Well, look, we'll have to wait and see what's actually in the budget tomorrow. But I think the economy is turning a corner. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the Bank of England recently. And I think that will provide a backdrop for the Chancellor setting out where he's seeing taxation and public spending tomorrow. But we won't have long to wait.
OK, well, we can talk endlessly about the budget, but I feel like, given that this is this time tomorrow, we'll talk about other things this morning. Rwanda, back, a bit of a headache for the Prime Minister. He was hoping to have this all done and dusted by the 20th of March. The Lords, predictably, not happy with your bill. And, well, how are you going to get that through Parliament with these amendments from the Lords? A lot of your MPs voted for that, absolutely holding their nose, not happy with a lot of what they conceded to. These amendments aren't going to be approved by MPs, are they? And that means what's going to happen to these flights?
Well, look, first of all, it's not unusual for a government to be defeated in the House of Lords. It's been going on for some decades now. But I think we'll have to have a look at the legislation as it comes back from the Lords, you know, which will happen soon, and laying out exactly the government's approach. But if I might say, I think this is very, very important legislation. And I think the British people are right behind this. This is all about taking effective action against illegal migration, taking effective action against the people smugglers, the people who are profiting from human misery, making sure there's a deterrent effect by being able to return people or send people to a safe third country, in this case Rwanda. That is what this is all about. I think the British people are behind what we're doing. The House of Commons is backing what we're doing. So, you know, I think on that basis we'll have to see how it comes back from the Lords, but I think the British people want to see Parliament getting on with delivering this.
Human misery, Minister, really is the cost of living crisis for so many people, and they simply just care about their own lives and how much money they will have in their pockets or purses and whatever. What can I say? But, I mean, there's one of the proposals that to tax taxi fares, put 20% VAT on taxi fares around the country, business class tickets on airplanes, to tax those as well. You know, whether these things are true or not, and you're going to say to me, we'll have to wait until tomorrow. But what I'm simply saying is, you guys in government, you just don't seem to get the message, do you? People are absolutely creaking, they're breaking at the knees, and they're saying, get off our backs.
Well, I think what people do recognise is that the government intervened well and correctly over recent years. For example, during the pandemic, in terms of the supporting people to remain in employment, the fact the government paid a big part of people's energy bills over the last couple of winters. I think people support that. That is why there's been an increase in public spending. But, as I said earlier, the economy is now turning a corner, and that then sets us up nicely to be able to afford things like tax cuts. But do bear in mind that we've already got the tax cut, which kicked in January, at the end of January, the 2% reduction in national insurance, which delivers a £450 tax cut for the average worker on £35,000 a year. So there's already tax cuts that have come in. We'll have to see what else the Chancellor brings us tomorrow.
I wasn't talking about tax cuts, I was talking about tax increases, which are being heavily rumoured. But the thing is, and I take your point about keeping people in employment during the pandemic and whatever, and if people do recognise how kind and benevolent the government was during that time, why did they repay you with a 27% deficit behind Labour in the polls?
Well, I think, if I might, I think we'll have to wait and see what people think at the time of the election later this year. I mean, that is the poll that really matters. And I think once the people see where is Rishi Sunak wanting to take the country for a full first term as our Prime Minister, then I think the polls may reflect something rather different. We also, of course, have some very important elections coming up in about 8 weeks' time for the London Mayor, for the West Midlands Mayor, for Teesside and so on, as well as important council elections, Police and Crime Commissioner elections. So there's some important elections coming up in just a couple of months' time as well, where we will see how people actually vote.
Speaking of how people actually vote, George Galloway won resoundingly in Rochdale last week, considered a bit of a firebrand. He has said that this election is going to be, and I quote, all about Muslims. And yet the Conservatives, as we see on the front of the Times this morning, divided over the new definition of extremism. And we've seen in recent weeks the row over failing, or whatever you may see of it, to call out Islamophobia. Does the Conservative Party have a problem with Islamophobia, with Muslims?
No, I don't think we do. And actually, if I might, there haven't actually been any proposals published yet. The Prime Minister announced on Friday in his address at Downing Street that extremism is something that the country does need to tackle. We've seen a rise in extremism in recent months, and I think we do need to get to grips with that. I think the election of George Galloway is reflective of that rise in extremism. So I think that is, if you like, is the question in front of us. How do we tackle that extremism? And I think you'll see government announcements forthcoming from the Community Secretary and from the Prime Minister as to how this is going to be tackled. But we shouldn't underestimate the degree of the problem that faces us. The election of George Galloway, you mentioned, was actually a massive failure on the part of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in effectively having to disown their candidate due to comments that were widely viewed as being anti-Semitic. And Keir Starmer said that he had got rid of this problem in the Labour Party, and that, of course, has turned out not to be the case. And this is somebody who wants to run the country, and he can't even seem to run his own party. Mr.